The Underdogs, Chapter 10. This time, he wasn't going to tell anybody what he planned to do, not even Tim. He was just going to improvise, the way you did with a broken play. He had decided in the night that Tim was wrong, but his first priority was to find more bodies, not a coach, even though he was pretty much set on who he thought the coach ought to be. It was actually pretty funny, Will thought. Not Simpsons funny, just odd. Just by writing a letter and getting a response he never expected, it was like he was now running football for 12-year-olds in Forbes. Like he was the town council guy for the West River League. And all he really wanted to do was have somebody hand him the ball. For now, he was keeping his eye on the ball. Somehow, however, whatever it looked, he kept repeating that one line to himself over and over. They were going to have a season. Somehow, he had been telling himself all night and all morning, and he would keep telling himself he was going to find at least one more guy. Had decided that was one job, as his dad liked to say. If they had to start the season with 11, so be it. They'd just line up and pray that nobody got hurt or quit. Will had come too far to back up or back off now, whatever it took. Of course, he'd never heard a team going into a season with just 11 players. Of course, he knew enough about football to know they'd be living on the edge every time the ball was snapped. Oh, sure, he could see it now. Some close game where these best guys would never get to come off the field. That part was fine for Will, of course. He never wanted to be off the field for a single play. He even loved playing on the kickoff team and flying downfield as a gunner covering punt returns. But not everybody was like him. They just weren't. He knew his friends loved football, just not the way he did. So it wasn't too hard to see Tim or Chris or Jeremiah being totally gassed by the end of some games, especially when the weather was still warm in September, hands on knees, too tired to make the tackle or the block or the play that might make the difference between winning and losing. Because that was Will Tyler's big thing. Even though he hadn't been talking about it with his buds, they had other things to worry about these days. But he didn't just want to leave a season. He wanted to win the season. For him, the object of the game hadn't changed since last year's championship game against Castle Rock. To beat them in the big game. To do that, he knew he needed more bodies. Starting with one more, just because you had to start somewhere. It was why he got on his bike on Saturday morning and went looking for the biggest body in the 7th grade at Forbes Middle School. Toby Keenan, who looked like he was 2 or 3 years older than he was, or more, lived in a small one-story house on the far side of town away from the river, his street becoming a dirt road at the end where the house was. Toby lived there with his dad, who'd been a teammate of Will's dad at Forbes High School, a middle linebacker on defense and a guard on offense. But his real positions were mean and scary, Joe Tyler said. Now, Dick Keenan worked for the town of Forbes, not for the town council the way Tim's dad did, but a guy who did road work and tree work in the summer and drove a snowplow in the winter, clearing roads for the town and driveways on his own time. Dick Keenan was big himself, with a huge belly and a look on his face. Every time Will saw him behind the wheel of one of his trucks, that made you think that it was the very next moment he was going to pick a fight with the whole world. Will didn't know a whole lot about Mr. Keenan's wife, even had trouble remembering what she looked like when she was still living with them. Basically, he just knew that she wasn't living with them for now, that she was another person who had left Forbes and never came back. Will had asked his dad one time why Mrs. Keenan had left her husband and son behind, and all his dad said was the reason was Mr. Keenan. When Forbes was still playing in Pop Warner, the last year they played in Pop Warner, Toby had played in 5th grade as a middle linebacker, just like his dad. He and Tim were about the same size then. It was before Toby shot up past everybody in their grade. One time, Mr. Peggs had looked out at the gym floor during Phi Ed and said, "Sometimes I think I can hear Toby growing." But Toby could play. They put him at middle linebacker and had him play some tight end. Didn't even look at him anywhere else, just because of his size. And he wasn't just a load. He could run, even if he seemed reluctant, at least in Tim's view, or at least in Will's view. To relay to really lay people out on defense. Sometimes the coaches had to remind him that it was a contact sport and hard tackling was allowed. But when he did put a hard tackle on you in practice, all Will found out more than once it was about the same thing as running into a tree. Everybody could see he had a talent for football, and two things going for him that Will's dad always said you couldn't teach: big and scary fast. Toby Keenan just seemed almost too gentle a kid for football. Maybe that's why maybe that's why Will's view again. He never loved playing, and that would have been enough right there to hold him back. But there was something much bigger going on for that big kid, his dad. Forget about loving the game. In the end, Dick Keenan made his son hate it. Mr. Keenan came to most games, home and away, a permanent game face on him, one that reminded Will of a balled fist. That wasn't the worst of it either. The worst of it was that he yelled almost the whole time, yelled out more than even the coaches did, more than the other parents combined. At home games, Will would look up into the stands sometimes, and it would be the same scene over and over again. Mr. Keenan at the top of the bleachers, by himself, yelling away. By the time they had played just a couple of games, most of the other parents wouldn't go near him, and any adult showing up for the first time wouldn't stay near him for long. He never swore, not that Will heard. He didn't make negative comments about the other players on either team, never complained about the officiating. It was all directed at Toby, telling him to pay attention, to know where the ball was, to be aware of whatever formation the other team was running, telling all this to a fifth grade middle linebacker. A fifth grade middle linebacker. Don't be a bonehead and go for that fake, you jackwagon. How about hitting somebody, or do you still think you're playing flag football? Every so often, maybe once or twice a game, he would offer his son what passed for a compliment with him. That's better. About halfway through the season, their coach that year, Mr. Malzoe, asked Toby's dad if he could possibly dial it down a little. This was after a game in the parking lot, and the whole team heard and saw what happened next. Mr. Keenan almost challenging Mr. Malzoe to a fight. It ended with Mr. Keenan saying, "I don't tell you how to coach, don't tell me how to father." So nothing changed until the last game, what was called their Super Bowl. Late in the game, a game Forbes was winning by 20 points, Toby missed a tackle on the other team's tight end, and the kid went 65 yards for a touchdown that only made the final score a little closer than it should have been. For some reason, it made Mr. Keenan's head explode one more time that afternoon. As soon as the tight end was across the goal line, this is what everybody at Shea Field heard. "Toby Keenan, if you're not going to play to the end of the game, why are you still out there?" There was a pause, and then, "Why don't you just quit playing now?" That's exactly what Toby Keenan did. He walked off the field before the kickoff, took off his helmet when he got to the sideline, took off his jersey, put both at the end of the Forbes bench. Then he walked past the bleachers, his dad at his usual spot near the top, kept walking toward the parking lot. And as far as Will knew, Toby walked all the way home, to the house on the dirt road that was the end of Spencer Street. He had never come out for football or played football, not even flag football, since. Now Will was about to knock on his front door and ask him to come back. The orange Department of Public Works truck was in the yard. Next to it was an old maroon Camry. It had to mean that Mr. Keenan was home. Will didn't see as how that was going to help him out very much. He'd made the bike ride over there thinking he had a better chance of pulling this off. How many Hail Mary passes could you throw if it was just him and Toby alone? Toby answered the door, and as soon as Will saw him, he was thinking that the only thing this boy had in common with Dick Keenan was size, because he had a much nicer face, with much darker hair, worn long. Will had always thought There was a niceness to Toby at school, as shy and quiet as he was, as much as he kept to himself. He must have gotten that from his mom. Briefly, Will thought of all the things his own dad said Will had in common with his mom, the one who'd left him a lot differently than Toby's had. Hey, Toby said. Hey, Will said. Keeping his voice as low as possible, Toby said, Listen, I know why you're here. Will smiled. He reads minds, too. Still standing there on the porch, Toby having made no move to invite him in. It was then that Will heard the booming, familiar voice from somewhere behind Toby, like a voice was trying to rattle the walls of the tiny house, like the voice was still coming from the top of the bleachers. Who's here? Mr. Keenan yelled. Is it that idiot cable guy finally showing up 3 hours after he was supposed to be here? Then Mr. Keenan was standing behind his son, in his white undershirt and baggy jeans, looking disappointed when he saw that their visitor was Will. Nobody was very happy to see Will at 127 Spencer. I know you, he said. Joe Taylor's kid, the halfback. You're fast. Nice to see you, Mr. Keenan. Check him out, Tobes, the dad said. A pipsqueak half your size and still twice the player you are, or were. Dad, Toby said. A look on his face that Will remembered from when they still played together. The big man put his small eyes on Will and said, What do you want? To get as far away from here as possible, Will thought, as soon as I say to Toby what I came here to say. Just came to see Toby. Never saw you here before. In the same soft voice he'd used when he greeted Will, eyes looked down like he was studying his sneakers, or Will's, Toby said, He's my friend, Dad. He doesn't need a reason to be here. They all just stood there until Mr. Keenan said to Toby, Well, anyway, when the cable guy shows up, come get me even if I'm taking my nap, so I can give him a piece of my mind. Will found him wondering how big a piece Toby's dad could spare as the man grumped off toward the back of the house. When he was gone, Toby said, I'd ask you to come in, but you don't want to. Will said, Yeah. It's cool, Toby said. I'm used to it. They both know. They both knew what he was talking about. Yeah, Will said again. Toby said, You should probably go, though. If he figures out why you came, at least why I'm pretty sure you came, it won't be good. I'm not here about him, Will said. I'm here about you. Now Toby's voice was barely more than a whisper, the sound coming out of him more scared than anything else. Will, he said, I wish I could, but I can't. Will tried to look past him, saying, Maybe you can't. Like it's like we're talking in code, he thought. But what you can do is hear me out. Out here or inside, your call. But I gotta say what I came to say. Toby pointed, and the two of them walked to the end of the driveway where the truck was parked and sat next to each other on the rear fender, almost like they were using the orange truck for cover. Listen, I'll try to keep this short, Will said. I'm not here to blow smoke at you, but I'm not going to lie either. We need more players, like right now. Practice is starting in a week, so I need you to play. But on top of that, I want you to play too. But I told you I can't. Can't or won't. Does it make a difference? Then he took a casual look over his shoulder at the front door, the door still closed, Dick Keenan at a safe distance, at least for now. Dude, Will said, this season is going to be awesome. With you back in uniform, we can kick some serious butt. Shock the world, he grinned. Well, maybe not the world, just the West River League. But we can do this. Turn ourselves into one of those underdog teams. Heck, not just one of them. Make ourselves the underdogs. Do something that will make this town remember what it's like to cheer. You don't need me to do that. See, that's just one more thing you're wrong about. We do need you. Need your size, your speed, the way you play. Adding you to the guys we already have, we can crush this. I totally mean it. Trying to talk himself into that, he knew as much as Toby Keenan. You mean the way I played, like past tense. I don't know everything at our age, but I know this. You don't lose it between 10 and 12, dude. So you missed last season. Big deal. You're a great player. Maybe the other guys didn't see it. Maybe even the coach didn't. But I did. You'd barely figured out how to put on your own shoulder pads, and you were still one of the best guys we had. Doesn't matter. Will said, Are you serious? It's all that matters. Toby gave him another quick look over his shoulder. Will, he said, you love to play. I didn't. I don't. And probably never will. Because you haven't given yourself a chance, Will nodded at the house. Because he never gave you a chance. It wasn't all him. It was me, too. And I was never as good as you say I was. Will made a buzzer noise. Wrong again. Now Will chucked the front door, lowered his own voice. You're listening to me, but you're not hearing me. I saw what you were like in practice when he wasn't around. I saw what it was like for you when he didn't show up at an away game. You were one player when he was around and a totally different one when he wasn't. Toby said, You don't understand. Like his own words were hurting him. If I come back, he comes back. Are you going to tell me you want that? Will gave him a long look. I would make that deal in a heartbeat, he said, then come back an hour later and make it happen again. Then the words were just spilling out of him. Will telling Toby they would have beaten Castle Rock last season if he'd still been playing in the middle of the D. Telling him how much they needed him, not just because he would make a total of 11 players, because they needed his talent. Needed somebody his size, because even though Will could imagine a team that was good and fast, they were going to get pushed around without at least one big guy the other team had to worry about. And not just big in size, he said, big but with a big heart, like yours, like the one I know you have to have just to be. It's not what he says, Toby said. He talks about me like I'm the opposite because I quit, wouldn't go back. Said I wasn't just heartless, that I was gutless. For the first time, Toby smiled. Maybe my dad thinks he is only one with guts because his gut is so gigantic. Toby Keenan looked down again, the smile off his face. Out of him, just that fast. But why are we even talking about this? He said. It would just start up all over again. Only if you let it. Only if you let him. It's like they say on TV. You can't stop him. You can only hope to contain him. Then, you don't know what it's like. Will said, You're right, I don't. But I will make you a promise. You won't just be getting a bunch of teammates who will have your back. You will be getting a bunch of friends. Starting with me. Will kept going, feeling like he had his attention. Like he might be getting through. Maybe be on a roll all of a sudden. Get it through your head. You wouldn't be doing this to prove anything to your dad. But maybe it would be about proving something to yourself. There's a big player inside you. No matter what you're telling yourself, let him out. Will told Toby he didn't need an answer today, and if he wanted, Will told him, he could come and watch the first couple of practices. No pressure, no worries, just to check it all out. Just to see if he felt like to be around the game again. Toby said he'd think about it. That was the best he could do. Before adding this, but it's still not going to happen. Give the idea a chance, Will said. All I'm asking. Thanks, Toby said. For what? Toby said, just thanks. They pounded each other some fists. Will walked down the driveway to where he'd left his bike. Before he got on, he turned and saw Toby Keenan walking slowly toward the house, as if it was the last place on earth he wanted to be. Like he was walking off the field that day, walking away from football the way he did 2 years ago. Will watched until he was through the front door, closing it behind him. Will feeling bad for him, for the life he had on the other side of that door. He was still glad he'd come. The big kid hadn't said yes, but he sure hadn't said no.